Thanks for joining. Antonio, Islam. I'm currently in Singapore on my way to Dubai. I'm on my way after that to Baku, Azerbaijan, where we have the ICPC World Finals. But we're here discussing something that I think is equally exciting, if not more exciting, Agentic AI, specifically in supply chain, things like a transportation management system, warehouse management systems, order management systems. On the one hand, I want to hear your perspective from the point of view of the industries and the clients that you serve. On the other, I'd really like to also deep dive on the technical aspect of it. Don't be shy to discuss also some of the limitations or some of the cool things that you've seen recently, things that they can try, hub repositories or startups that you're excited about, etc. For those who don't know, I'm Danny. I'm the CEO of a company called bld.ai. You can check us out. Go ahead, Antonio.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danny, for having me. Good luck with the travels. Yeah, so a little bit of background myself. I lead our technology and AI vertical for a company called SCI. I've been working with Danny for quite some time across all different types of numerous projects. My background is heavy on the software side. I started writing software back in the 90s, done several different types of languages, frameworks, anything that has to do with data lifecycle management, identity, federated identity systems, anything that has to do with software architecture, all the way to crypto and AI. Most recently, I was a network engineer out of University of Miami in the early 2000s. I was really focused more on the infrastructure and backend of services. So how do you actually maintain the operational side of a university across all these different kind of suites of software with a virtual environment, VDI, anything that really has to do from a kind of delivery perspective to support the organization from a telecommunications perspective. I was an entrepreneur for quite some time. Now I've been at SCI for now about 5 years and happy to talk about logistics. Probably important to note as well, my master's is actually in logistics, which is why it's an area very close to our.
Thanks for making time. Islam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Danny. Hi, Antonio. I'm a software engineer. I have around 15 years of experience. I've worked on several domains during my career. I worked on e-payment. I worked on RPs. I worked on telecom, banking. Currently, I'm working on logistics as I'm working for DHL. I have a master's degree from the Organization of Liverpool. I graduated in 2007 from Hawaiian University in Egypt.
Great. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Just for a little bit of context also, I guess Antonio and I have known each other for quite a few years. When I used to live in Miami, I think we've been in the same circles, the entrepreneurial circles before Miami was a thing. I think even before Peter Thiel and a lot of the guys started talking about, I think Antonio was one of the key guy in the local ecosystem, training people, getting people excited on how to build good startups. And I think it's paid off over the years. And Islam and I have known each other also for quite several years. I've spent a lot of time traveling around the world to go find people in places like Colombia, Egypt, Philippines, Pakistan, and Islam comes across as one of the strong pillars because there's a lot of talent in those places that often are Western educated, but not always. There's some really amazing guys in Egypt, and Islam is one of them. And he was mentioning he's been serving DHL for quite some years now as a key guy internally to help build their microservice architecture. Yeah, so let's just dive into it. Maybe Agentic AI is high level, it's top of mind, but what does it mean in supply chain from the point of view of like a transportation management system? Can my AI replace people? Does it replace the way my dispatchers do work? Walk me through how you see it and the impact that it has.
Yeah, I think logistics is not the only industry. The big question here is how many jobs is AI going to start displacing? And I've always looked at jobs, not from a kind of terminating perspective, but I do believe that when jobs are displaced or certain things in the industry happens, other jobs are going to come up, right? We always talk about this during the Industrial Revolution or went to manufacturing. What happened is all these line workers, their jobs were on the line because all these robots and machines were going to come in. But what happened is that these machines started making mainstream. Well, what ended up happening was that you had all the people who needed to, who's going to install these machines, who's going to actually write the software for them, who's going to maintain them over time. The same thing happens now in logistics. Is AI going to replace a lot of the stuff in logistics? Yeah. But what are some of the things that are going to come up as AI makes mainstream in logistics? And I think a lot of the focus is going to fall into support, how to actually communicate better, how to be more proactive in terms of your customers. And I think one of the big pieces here is we're always talking about digital twins as well. How do you actually create the guardrails or the sandbox where you can actually simulate particular things, right? When you're looking at big companies, especially like third-party logistics companies, what happens when weather changes or routes change or particular costs change, right? There's models that a lot of the companies have already built that actually proactively looks at this, but what happens now on the human side, right? Like you mentioned dispatchers, how much of that job can be done by AI as these things change and you simulate down the road to make sure that you're most efficient as things go down the systems and logistics. So I do think that it is going to take some jobs, but I do think that there's a whole new world that we don't even understand yet that is going to come up. And I think the shift on a lot of the companies is going to move towards customer service and being able to give real-time updates for a lot of the stuff that we're going to be seeing.
So you see a lot of improvement also in the customer experience for how we track our packages, how we receive our packages, the time, the cost, the efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. The running joke right now is imagine if you can talk to your package directly, right? So imagine when you start thinking about different industries within logistics, right? Or what you're shipping. Imagine when you start talking about healthcare and medicine. Okay, what happens with all these IoT sensors as particular temperatures are not maintained? Well, how are you able to now build that trust with your supplier when you're basically blind and you have to rely on the third party company to actually tell you what's going on with your package, right? A lot of that stuff is what blockchain was trying to do, specifically like TradeLens and IBM. They had this whole blockchain of traceability. Now with addition of AI, how are you able to now create that value for the customer to feel that the integrity of whatever they're ordering or the integrity of the entire supply line is actually maintained using Agentic AI, because there's not enough support people in the world to support all these third-party logistics customer service reps.
And when you say supply chain, I think you're also thinking it's not just the DHLs of the world, like Islam is DHL, FedEx, UPS, etc. But I think you're also thinking, let's say, the supply chain of how vaccines are sent around, how medicine is sent around, or how like a mining company might be moving around millions of tons of earth and etc. That's the kind of amazing new user experiences that we can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you see it, Islam? How do you see this from a technology standpoint, from your lens? Are you seeing as much as the marketers promise as the builder? How easy do you see these promises coming to life? Yeah.
What was just mentioned by Antonio, for example, there's type of packages that has sensors, and based on that can be used for commercial side. For example, company can say your coffee beans are transferred at 10 degrees from this place to Ethiopia, for example, to the US. It's coming fresh, can be used for commercial side. It builds trust with the customers. It can be used also for type of luxuries products or type of luxury goods that are sent from this place to that place. And later on I believe it can be used for all the use, not only luxury one.
How do you see let's say a DHL e-commerce today leveraging this? What are some things maybe as a customer? Do I see anything new coming online?
Let me tell you how transporting or moving a mail item in DHL happens. For example, first, the merchant asks DHL to come and take this mail item and send it to that place. When DHL agent arrives, the merchant first prepares a document called BOL, Bill of Lading, or sometimes it's called consignment note. In this document, the merchant describes the mail items and it describes all the details and the destination address and so on. The first step that happens at DHL facility is receiving, in which one DHL person describes the mail item from his point of view. He just add the details manually, and then comes the encoding part, in which the mail item passes through machines to decide the size of the mail item and to write the size of the mail item and so on. And then the next is encoding. We also generate a code label that's posted on the mail item. And then this actually describes the destination, address, and other parts related to the destination, such as the zip code and some other details. The next step is the sorting. We have two types of sorting. We have outbound sorting and inbound sorting. Outbound sorting is if you're going to send the mail item from this facility to another facility in another state or in another city. Once it arrives to the destination, comes the process of inbound sorting. Actually, each mail item has zip code footprint. The zip code footprint decides which facility it will be routed, actually. So this happens in the outbound sorting, and the inbound sorting, once it arrives, the zip code is inspected further, and we decide how we will hand over the mail item to USPS. DHL doesn't do the last mile delivery. It depends only on USPS to do it. Okay, so this is in general what happens inside DHL. How to fit Agentic AI in this process? I believe it can happen for exceptional cases such as missorts, or it happens actually many times, missorts. So this is the main thing actually where we can fit Agentic AI at this point. Also for forecasting, probably for forecasting using some machine learning, we can forecast other demands. Based on that, we can forecast demands, future demands, and do some changes probably to the facilities, probably move some forklifts from this place to that place and so on.
I think you've described for us a lot of the things that could be lowered in terms of costs, maybe fewer touches per shipment, faster cycle times, reduced claim leakage, smarter consolidation and sorting. But how easy do you see this happening? Today, it's a microservice architecture with lots of APIs that are talking to one another. There's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of cybersecurity, etc. Do you see like a DHL just dropping agents in place? Or are they already dropping agents in place? I assume they can't be sending all these, it's terabytes of data per second that they probably generate. So they can't be feeding all of this to OpenAI API. It would be cost prohibitive. So how are they thinking, or how are you thinking? What would be your recommendation in terms of using perhaps smaller agents that are self-hosted, using maybe open source models like Mistral or others, etc.? How do you think this is all going to come together?
Okay, I believe the best use case that an agentic AI can fit in DHL is exceptional cases, such as mainly missorts, probably damaged package, things that are exceptional cases mainly, because these require some human intervention. The systems that are already existing, if we are going to follow the system rules or the business rules that are already existing, in order to fix this error, it would take a long time. So sometimes it requires some exceptional decisions. So the best use case thing that can fit in that situation, or that can solve this situation with less human intervention and with less touches to the mail item, is Agentic AI. And I'm expecting the architecture can be an agent AI that has access to all the events, all the data, and all the databases. It depends actually on the responsibilities that this Agentic AI will be responsible for. It can have access to other third-party systems to get forecasts, to get weather details, to get things that are related to work congestions and so on. And it will process all these details. Based on that, it can decide the best decision. There are two options here. After deciding the best decision that fixes the issue, probably it can just pass those decisions to a system, an existing, let's say, an existing microservice that would execute or that would decide the best decision to execute, or the agent AI would just call some other APIs and other microservices that would execute the decision themselves.
Yeah, architecturally speaking, I think what's going to happen is, and if you really look at the cycle of technology over time, all of these cycles always go to one extreme and the other, right? Hey, no cloud, everything on-prem. Okay, everything on cloud, everything on-prem, right? So I think also architecturally speaking, when you start looking at a lot of these software bases, you're going to have this kind of dichotomy between microservices or monolithic. And I think companies always end up in some. If you look at this from a spectrum, companies always end up somewhere in the middle, right? Okay, some microservices, some on-prem. And I think that's going to naturally evolve. Now, one of the things that we start thinking that you mentioned and Islam just pointed out is these multi-agentic workflows, great, right? All of these things are going to have different personas, they're going to have different responsibilities, and they're only going to look at a sliver of the data to be able to give you that particular value. But what's going to happen once we have that is, for example, the logistics world that we're talking about now, when several agents disagree with the right course of action, giving a set of inputs, right? And let's just say, for example, national catastrophes or like very drastic market breaks in terms of delivery, or like anything in terms of availability from third-party logistics or last mile delivery. So I think what happens there is, as leaders in the industry, we need to start thinking about, okay, what happens assuming that AI takes over a lot of that workload? What are the problems or challenges that are going to come when these agentic workflows actually become more autonomous? Exactly what I just mentioned in terms of, okay, we'll have 2-3 different agents. Now they disagree. Okay, who needs to do that? And most people will say, great, it's going to be human in the loop. But like you mentioned, Danny, what happens when there's terabytes or petabytes of data that you need to assess from an IoT perspective? And all of this, a human's not going to be able to process it on the fly to be able to actually help the agents do this. So what does that world look like? And is there an agent that protects the other agents? Or there's another type of persona, or it's like agent in the loop over agent in the loop. And then you start becoming very recursive. So we need to think about those problems that I think are the next wave of challenges that we're going to see globally.
I think both of your answers really complement each other from bottom up and the top down. I'm curious to picking up on a little bit of the things that you said, but it does sound to me like we will see new opportunities for revenue also, right? Sort of new premium service tiers that previously were not available. It means in terms of maybe faster delivery, more resilience, more guaranteed, more transparency, proactively keeping your commitments in the supply chain. I don't think anyone who works in the industry here would say that we figured out everything. But as we figure out new problems and as we make it more efficient, do you also see opportunities, or what opportunities are you most excited at in terms of helping them make more money? How do you see maybe Islam, you first at DHL e-commerce? What's a new thing perhaps that they could offer that would, let's say, do a 20x uplift on a certain type of service that they were not offering before? Anything that comes to mind?
Actually, in DHL, we have fixed routes from this facility to that facility. And this is what I've seen. It's fixed. For example, if you are going to move this, during encoding, actually, we decide the route and of a specific mail item, and this mail item should go to a predefined route. For example, in order to move mail item from New York to, let's say, from Chicago, for example, will usually take the same route. However, if we use Agent AI, it can take a new route decided by the Agent AI. This new route can be decided by the weather, can be decided by the current existing workforce, the vehicle, the number of vehicles and the fleet currently existing. It would eventually lead to, let's say, less empty hours for the human worker and also less empty hours for the vehicles actually staying. It will reduce the oil consumption and so on. So this is one thing. When we decide every time a new road based on the current existing situation, it would make a huge reduce to the cost.
I think opportunities are around cost reduction. Where do you see like players in the supply chain being able to increase the revenue by perhaps offering new services as a customer or as something? I can point to a lot of things that could be improved.
There is no specific new service that I'm currently thinking of, but it's actually about new strategies. For example, let's say LLMs or using machine learning, we can forecast specific load that a specific facility would face in the future. Based on that, we can prepare this facility and move machines from this facility to that one. It can also help create offers based on the expected forecasts for specific goods. These forecasts can be done based on, for example, social media trends. We can decide this piece of this product or this merchant would need to send several mail items in the future. So you can prepare facilities to fulfill the merchant's needs.
Yeah, I think it is nailed it in terms of what I also think is going to happen in the industry. And I don't think there's going to be new services, at least in the short term. Obviously, we don't know what that industry or what AI is going to do from a long-term perspective. But I do think what's going to happen is that there's not going to be direct lines of revenue where you have this new type of service or whatnot. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have an increase of your base service layer because you're adding all of this transparency on the other side, right? So say, for example, if I have some type of enterprise contract with you, and I can say, hey, my rates across all the packages are going to go up by $1 for these particular types of services. And the customer is going to say, why are you raising the prices? You're going to say, actually, now you can actually have real-time reporting. We can have dashboards. You can have mitigation strategies. You have all this stuff that we've already baked into our baseline. So I think you're going to see an increase of revenue for things that the market is demanding. And I also think we're in a life cycle right now from a globalization perspective where it is so easy to copy not only software, all kinds of retail goods and everything. So there's going to be a big push demanding these third-party logistics companies to be able to actually give them some type of framework that they can follow to make sure that there's authenticity behind what is getting shipped from one place to the other or across the entire supply chain, right? So you want to mitigate some of that risk that companies just have to go through right now in a crate coming from somewhere else from the world, and it's all a bunch of just replicas rather than the original product. So I think that's going to be they're going to start demanding that. And I think third-party logistics are going to start going even broader. So they're going to go directly from product, directly shipping to customer in a much more visible way.
I agree with your perspective, guys. I think what I'm fishing for is not necessarily an entirely new service, but I was thinking along the lines of, if I can challenge, maybe I'm challenging both of you a little bit, but there's the customer who is the person receiving the package. And would I pay a little bit more for better tracking today? Probably not, because ultimately we're still all very price sensitive. But perhaps given the same price, would I pick the carrier where I can have, let's say, better return services? I'm fishing around. If I were in the shoes of DHL e-commerce or some of those guys, I'd be really curious to know what are those things that they're taking and then they'll see coming in the future. Which brings me to our last segment. I'd love to hear from each of you guys. What in the next 6 months are you most excited to see? Not just in e-commerce and supply chain, but in general, like in technology. This year, we saw MCP, right? A lot more MCP servers coming along. So agents can take more functions. Last year, we saw a lot of RAGs to retrieve augmented generations. What are you excited about? What do you think is the next thing after we've seen RAGs and MCPs and now the very strong reasoning models? What's the next frontier? What are you excited about in the next 6 months?
There's a question of the revenue side and then from a revenue side, I follow your train of thought, you also have different people or different entities throughout the whole kind of business cycle that have different things. And I agree with you. I think from an end consumer perspective, we're probably not going to pay extra for even real-time tracking, but for a better experience in terms of me being able to talk to my package from something that I bought from American Apparel, right? To just continue with the same example. But you do see companies like Shop, for example, that sit in the middle between the customer experience and the logistics company that's actually going to be delivering X, Y, and Z. I think that B2B2C is going to be a huge market for the people in the middle. I think they're going to be benefiting the most because as an enterprise that sits in the middle, you are going to want to have some type of service layer or offering from whoever the big company is for you to be able to actually have more visibility into these things. Because as a company in the middle, my number one thing is I want to mitigate risk and I want to make sure that I minimize my liability because at the end of the day, my customers are going to see my brand. It's not going to necessarily see the fulfiller of whatever is being ordered, right? They're not going to see the UPS, the DHL, the FedExes of the world. They're just going to say, hey, I'm giving you all the updates of your package. It doesn't matter who's behind us. So I think that middle side is where we're going to see a huge explosion where you're going to start seeing different revenue streams come in because of that middle layer that's being added from a value proposition.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think OpenAI or Anthropic or any other players are going to release? What excites you the most in the coming future?
Yeah, it's really interesting. MCP, you mentioned MCP. That's probably one of the biggest areas we're seeing right now. Obviously, Anthropic came out and said, hey, what about if we do these things? And that really starts hitting a little bit deeper in the software engineering side where, hey, I don't need to have all these APIs and the redocumentation that is not updated and being able to figure out how do I get this information from my CRM, like HubSpot or any of these other companies. And MCP basically now says, hey, absolutely, you can just talk English and I'll figure out what I need to call. And then I'm actually going to expose it and give you that information. So I think the maturity of that is going to be critical. And I'm super interested to see what's going to happen in terms of adoption and how companies are going to be able to support this version and author it as we move forward. I think that's probably one of the most exciting areas. The other side is, what happens when you start getting this almost maturity of the industry where you don't have 2,000-3,000 agents, you have a few companies that have all these fleets of agents. What happens when those agents start doing the work, for example, like very basic skill jobs, right? Like a data entry, for example. What happens here in the workforce? Are they now going to be more skillful? Are we talking about like business analysts becoming more engineering and engineering becoming more business savvy? So I think you have this consolidation of skill set that we're going to see in the workforce that it's exciting to see because we've never seen this, we've never experienced this. And it's something that what happens in a utopia where everyone can do everything, well, what differentiates you? That's probably a really exciting area. Obviously, it comes with, as I mentioned, excitement, but there's a little bit of fear and a little bit of optimism, some pessimism. So it's a loaded bag of kind of emotional thoughts about what's going to happen in the future. But that's probably one of the most exciting areas for me.
What are you most excited to see getting released in the next 6 months? We saw RAGs last year. Now we're seeing a lot of MCPs this year. What's that piece of technology that you anticipate will arrive and you'll adopt overnight, perhaps, and change your own workflow?
As per my anticipation, I'm interested to see when they start adopting Agentic AI, how exactly the impact would be in terms of proficiency, in terms of efficiency of delivering things. Because in general, AI has several things or several risks. So I'm interested to see how exactly it will handle things, how the enhancement in service would be for the disasters if it's going to happen. At the company, like they have initiatives to use AI and Agentic AI, but in fact, they didn't use it till now. I'm interested to see when they start utilizing.
What tools do you guys currently use inside DHL? Are you allowed to use, say, Claude Code or Microsoft Copilot or something like this when you code?
Yeah.
What's the policy around those?
These things are used by developers. I have never. There is even some, for example, Copilot, I believe, is supported by DHL itself. There is a license. I don't remember if it was Copilot or some other service. It was an AI service. They give it to some set of
Gotcha.
developers. But let's say
Gotcha.
for others, there is no policy that prevents us, for example, from using ChatGPT or Copilot or anything. This would increase productivity, but it wouldn't do major disasters or major issues because eventually the person that's using it is a developer. He knows how to use it. I'm interested to know, for example, when we start using AI to make major decisions, for example, decide to, let's say, reorganize a specific facility. based on some forecasts. So how exactly would be the effect of that? So
From a workflow standpoint, you see this as it enables you to type faster. It's a better code completion, but it does not replace the necessity for the core coders to really understand what they're building.
as per the experience we have seen, it will not lead to reducing the core coders till this point, but probably at some point,
Yeah.
some developers can be replaced. Probably. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if this could happen or not. But even though if this happens, there should be a sort of accountability. Let's say some issue happens, some piece of code has caused a big disaster. So who to blame? AI? Who would pay the fee? Who would be fined? Actually, for example, let's say if you outsource to a company, would pay fees, would pay fines for you, for example, if it had caused a big disaster. But let's say if you just outsource the building of a specific product to an AI company, or let's say some open source AI service, who would be accountable for issues that would happen, that can happen out
Yeah.
of this?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a huge question, probably beyond the scope of today. One last question for you, Antonio. What's the last thing you vibe coded?
It's a good question. So I actually just started going a little bit deeper into vibe coding just to see how it would complement what that world looks like. As I mentioned, having been in software for so long, a lot of the things that, I've seen over the last 10 years has been abstraction, right? So a lot of the stuff that I'm now doing is basically these almost thinking about it from a microsite perspective of value offerings, right? Like, hey, how do I now create a presentation and make it a live link that I can share rather than a PowerPoint? So I'm really focusing on given a set of parameters, say, for example, like brand guidelines, right? Hey, what are the things that work? How do you actually structure your plans? A lot of it is not just going into one-shot coding and get the perfect kind of online presence. It's really more about how do I plan? How do I set up frameworks? How do I maneuver particular GitHub libraries that I want to use for very particular things in the web? So a lot of it is that. In terms of tools, I've been using a lot of Warp, obviously Cursor, Klein AI as well. Instead of you using their own tool like Cursor, they basically say, hey, you can use it within VS Code or any of these other ones. So those are probably two of the big ones. I'm also using a lot of N8N automation as well, just to look at workflows and triggers and being able to see what can I do here in the middle, given my particular ages, right? So a lot of the tests that I do is if I want to create, for example, that presentation, as I mentioned, I want to create a lot of the content, the bullets, the headers, like all the kind of marketing collateral. How do these agents interpret what I'm saying and which one gives me better results than the other and better subjective is more about what is the intent that you captured? What is it that you inferred? And what is it that you're actually telling me to do given the information that you have? So a lot of that is just having these different types of models, open source, commercial models. But I would say that's probably the three biggest tools I use right now is Cursor, Warp, also testing between Cursor and Klein, and then NAM with all these different types of agents. And then for fun, a lot of the image and video stuff, I think Google has an amazing project called Veo. It's incredible. Like they basically, if you want to think about it from like in the cinematography, if you want to maintain the same scene throughout all these different shots of, let's just say a commercial, for example, how do you maintain the same characters? How do you maintain the same background? Like I've been using a lot of that just for fun to understand like, hey, what is happening in the entertainment industry that also leads to what's going to happen when that makes it so good and mainstream that you no longer know fake news from what's the reality. And that's also an area that I'm really interested in is how social media gets influenced and how do we now create these guardrails to say, was something AI generated or was something actual real? Because those lines that everything looks real. And then you start defining it going down that philosophical path that just it's fascinating in terms of is humanity ending in the next decade, or are we going to do like our super overlords?
Thanks so much for your time. Let's do this another time in the near future. Thanks again.